of responses which thought that there is no point in comparing Western and Indian civilizations. Indian civilizations can be assessed only using Indian parameters, and so we do not want really West. We just need to have reforms and revivals in Indian traditions. So, whole of Indian political thought is emerging from this dilemma: whether to accept Indian colonial modernity or not, in what way, to what extent, and so on. So, all this was just to explain the context. As I said, what I'm going to try in this lecture or talk is to trace the history of ideas of nation in India, mostly in late 19th century. Why late 19th century, and to some extent also early 20th century? Because this is the time when social reforms are now becoming less important, and ideas of nation nationalism and cultural or religious revivalism are emerging or becoming stronger. This is not to say that idea of nation was totally absent before that, but if we look at mostly the 19th century, it is preoccupied with the questions of social reforms, or social reforms get the primacy. However, as we cross 1870s, to be very specific, we now see social reforms taking a back seat, and lots of thinkers who earlier were prominent social reformers or who gave primacy to social reforms in their earlier life or earlier writings are now turning to nationalism. The first thinker that I would like to talk about is Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, especially his novel Anand Mat. Bankim wrote 11 novels. He's considered as the founder of Bengali novel and also serious literature on political theory. He wrote a lot on Hindu reformism, also political theory, and he's famous as a novelist. In his early writings, Bankim writes a lot about caste, class, and gender oppression. If we look at, for example, his views on gender, they are quite radical. He talks about sharing of household works. So many of the contemporaries were still talking about women coming to public sphere. They were still talking about reforms in community, family, etc., etc. And it's very surprising that at this point, or at this juncture of time, Bankim is talking about sharing of household work, where he's arguing that men also should participate in household work in equal terms. He also wrote a book called as Shammo in Bengali, or Samya, in which he talks about peasants' poverty and problems in agriculture in India. However, after 1870s, he never returns to these themes. Many of his novels and other writings were published again and again, new editions, with new revisions, etc., etc. But he never came back to these themes. Shammo was never republished after this. So it is surprising to see that a thinker or an author who was so much occupied with gender, class, and caste in his earlier writings is now not giving primacy to them. It's not that he's not concerned, or it's not that he his views have changed, but so we can't really call that as epistemological break or something like that, because it's not that his views have changed, but his concerns are now very different. He is not giving primacy to all these issues. Nation is now becoming the primary object. We know that it is also the time when Indian National Congress is emerging and mainstream nationalist politics is emerging. But Bankim is not even participating in that. Bankim makes fun of politics of association. A few years before establishment of Indian National Congress, his novel Anand Mat is serialized in a magazine called Banga Darshan. particularly in 1881-82, this novel was serialized. Now it is slightly doubtful where Bankim really meant India as motherland in this particular novel, because the context, the plot of the novel, or what is implied, is also about Bengal. He describes the land of Bengal. Uh, However, we all know that this novel has had an all India appeal. There were several editions which were published again and again. There were several revisions in those editions. There were also several translations. So they were immediately translated in several Indian languages. This particular novel, but also other novels of Bankim. When we study texts, we talk about many approaches to study a text. There is textualism, which says that you need to look at only text because they have some permanent qualities. Like you don't need to look at context. A particular text of Shakespeare, for example, is so great that studying that text is enough. There is another approach, contextualism, which says that one needs to locate a particular text in the context in which it is emerging. There is another approach which talks about intention of the author. It says that we need to understand and reconstruct what was the original intention of the author while producing that text. However, even the intentionalist kind of approach proves to be inadequate when it comes to especially this particular novel by Bankim, because we it seems that the intentions of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee while writing this particular novels were different. Some of them are also obscure because he keeps on changing and revising this novel. However, what happened or what was the effect of that text or how people perceive that text seems to be different from what was the intention of the author. Though, so I'm trying to say that may perhaps when Bankim talks about idea of Mother India, he did not envision or he did not think of India as motherland. He probably was talking only about Bengal, at least in the initial drafts. However, the people perceived it in a very different way. And this novel and the song in it and like the whole story became inspiration for anti-colonial nationalist movement in India. Uh, what Bankim is doing in this novel is fusing the revived Hindu religious fervor with nationalistic zeal. So let's say he is revitalizing a particular form of Hinduism and combining it with his concerns of nationalist regeneration. This novel seems to be a historical novel because Bankim is writing in late 19th century and he's talking about, or it is based on an incident, a true historical incident which took place 100 years prior to writing of that novel. So Bankim is writing this novel, Bankim is writing about Bengal famine and Sannyasi rebellion, which took place in history in 1773. There was a disastrous famine, and Sannyasi rebellion was also a historical fact. However, Bankim treats history very casually. He is not claiming that it is a historical novel. So he is using some facts in history, picking them up from history, and using them for concerns of his own time. Nationalism doesn't seem to be concern of 1773 or even Sannyasi rebellion, though it was anti-colonial. It was not necessarily a nationalist rebel or nationalist revolution. Idea of nationalism was absent at that time. But nationalism was a major concern for Bankim and his times. And so, by using certain historical facts, Bankim is weaving or let's say creating a political myth. Novel is set against misrule, a weak state, lack of order, And so he finds this sannyasi rebellion as a point of convergence of bravery, religion, and patriotism. And he's treating this patriotism as nation as if it already existed at that time. So uh, we started with a Benedict Anderson, who is arguing that nation is an imagined community. So nation as imagination. For Bankim, on the other hand, nation is not imagined. He's talking about nation that is unimagined, because he's talking about nationalism in 1773 when it was not even imagined. So novel here is a kind of performance. This novel is performing something politically. It is creating an idea of nation which was not even imagined in the period where when the plot is set. Uh, the plot of the novel is very complex, so I'm not going to talk about all the stories or the subplots in the novel. But there is very interesting narrative or interesting story of a particular protagonist who loses, who is to begin with very prosperous, very rich, but because of famine, everybody leaves him. He also loses his prosperity and family members, and also other people on his estate. And so he's compelled to leave his estate and travel to some city like Murshid. Kolkata is still not a city, so Murshidabad and like other these other cities he's hoping to go for. So while he is traveling, some dacoits uh, ab- uh, take his wife and daughter away. And while searching for them, this protagonist meets a group of people who call themselves as Shontans or Santan. So they are children of mother or motherland. And they sing this song Vande Mataram. The protagonist asks them, who is this mother? Because he doesn't understand. The song describes land and its prosperity and its natural beauty, and at the same time, these children of the mother or santans use the term mother. So he just fails to understand who is this mother. He is also land. And in explanation of this song, Bankim explains this idea of motherland, which is not something very obvious given the context in which it is emerging. Now, when he meets this group of sannyasis or group of people who call themselves as santans because they are children of motherland, they take him to Anand Mutt, which is a kind of their ashram. In that ashram, which is inside the dense jungle, there are four caves kind of things, or let's say temple kind of thing, structures, cave come temple kind of structure. In the first cave, there is a idol of a goddess who is sitting in the lap of Vishnu. In the second cave temple, there is an idol or murti of Jagaddatri, a particular goddess. In the third cave, there is a statue of Kali, and in the fourth cave, there is a statue of Durga. Jagaddatri stands for the mother in the past. She is rich, beautiful, has everything. Kali stands for motherland or mother goddess, which has lost everything. She is dispossessed of everything because Kali stays in Smachan. So she stays in Smachan, she doesn't wear any clothes or jewelry. So Kali for Bankim stands for motherland in the present because she doesn't have anything. Durga, which is the statue according to in this story in the last cave temple, stands for mother in the future for Bankim. Future because Durga because it slays the demon, and she has all. She is not just like beautiful and wearing jewelry and clothes like Jagaddatri, But the major difference between Jagaddatri and Durga is that Durga also possesses weapons and kills or slays the demons. Now, these three, four deities that we just talked about, Vishnu and a goddess sitting in a lap of Vishnu, Jagaddatri, Kali, and Durga, these all deities or goddesses were there in Bengali culture, but in very, very different contexts. Uh, what Bankim is doing is he's pulling these divinities from established myths. There are established traditions which are very different. He's pulling these divinities from these different traditions, from separate context, and realigning them to produce a new deity or a new divinity called as Mother Goddess. He is also fusing this divine or this sacred with something very, very profane, and that is land. So these different divinities from different contexts, from different traditions are fused with land, which is actually a non-sacred or a profane thing, to make a new divine figure, which he just calls Ma or Mother. Uh, and so this is the idea. So if the point is that, so when Bankim is talking about idea of nation, or let's say idea of India, because it implied India for uh, the readers, it may not be, though it may not be implied by Bankim himself. Now, nation here is in the form of not just mother, but also mother goddess. Because Ma here is also like like Ma is also the epithet used for Kali, Durga, and all these deities, especially in the context of Bengal. Now, uh, this seems to be celebration of women or something like that, because women, like these are all goddesses. So it seems that Bankim is actually celebrating women as strength or Shakti or things like that. But interestingly, all these sannyasis that he is talking about, who form the core characters of this novel, they are not uh, necessarily devotees of any goddess. They all call themselves as devotees of Vishnu. And as I described in the first cave temple, the goddess uh, or mother is sitting in the lap of Vishnu. So ultimately, it is the Vishnu which is the uh, major deity here. However, the way in which Bankim interprets Vishnu is also different from the traditional interpretation or conventional interpretation of Vishnu in Bengal. The dominant uh, Bhakti sect in Bengal at that time was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sect, where Vishnu was considered as Premamay. So, loving Vishnu was considered as a way of devotion. Bankim thinks that this was the influence of Buddhism on Hinduism, and so he rejects it. Bankim wants to celebrate uh, Hinduism or Vishnu, like he wants to celebrate Krishna as king, politician, or warrior. So Shaktimay Vishnu becomes more important, or this is his interpretation of Vaishnava sect. Now, this is again very interesting because throughout medieval India, if we see, it is the Bhakti movement which upheld, it is like everywhere we see that Vaishnava sect all over India is identified in medieval period with Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement to some extent challenged caste system. It did not overthrow caste system, but it did challenge caste system because it gave opportunity to people from various castes to reach God, which was not permissible in many other existing traditions. However, while Bankim is invoking Vaishnavism, he is totally against this egalitarian uh, notion in bhakti, because for him it is not Shaktimay enough. Prem becomes a point of criticism here in Bankim. Uh, Another important leader or other another important author who also brings deities in political sphere is Tilak. Tilak, we all know, brought in Ganesh or Ganpati festival in public sphere. Scholars have called this as political recruitment of Ganpati, because Ganpati festival was there, it was celebrated, but in Western India, but strictly in private domain. Tilak reinvents this festival and brings religious festival in political domain. So religious festival here becomes now a technique of mobilization. Uh, Tilak is interestingly deriving these ideas, one from Greek Olympic, because he thinks that Olympic becomes the uh, basis for national formation or nationalist, or let's say patriotic spirit, if not nationalist, in Greece. So Greek Olympic is one of the inspiration from which Tilak is bringing religious festival in public sphere. Another inspiration, interestingly, for Tilak is Moharram, because it was celebrated in the public sphere. And that is why, or let's say to counter that, Tilak is bringing Ganpati in public sphere. He's also he also starts celebrating Shivaji festival. Uh, so he recasts Shivaji as a martial or Hindu icon. Now, this is totally in contrast with what his contemporary thinker Phule was doing. Jyotirao Phule was one of the earliest thinkers who revisits Shivaji. However, the way in which Phule interprets Shivaji is very different from the way in which Tilak interprets Shivaji. Phule celebrates Shivaji as the king or leader of peasants who formulates policies in favor of, or in like for the benefit or for the welfare of peasants. And so Phule uses a particular term called Kulawadi Bhushan to talk about Shivaji. Kulawadi, it can be translated in Hindi something like kulak, or like peasants. So while for Phule, Shivaji is the hero or king who worked for the benefit or for the welfare of peasants, for Tilak, Shivaji becomes a kind of martial Hindu king, or let's say Hindu icon. So, through these festivals, what Tilak is attempting is a sort of Hinduization of public sphere, which is at the same time taking inspiration from Greek tradition as well as Muslim traditions. Uh, what happens with Tilak's entry in politics is that now reforms are not at all prioritized. A major like a major thinker or major leader who was contemporary of Tilak and who worked very closely with Tilak was Gopal Ganesh Agarkar. Agarkar was one of the earliest liberal thinkers in Western India who talked about or who argued for social reforms. Agarkar held that without social reforms, we cannot arrive at nation or nationalism, because unless we all are like reformed, there is no point in talking about nation. On the other hand, we all know that Tilak was not ready to give agency to the colonial state for any kind of social reforms. And so for Tilak, politics or political independence was the priority, and social reforms now took the back seat. Because he did not want the alien or like the colonial state or what he thought was alien government in intervening Indian cultures, practices, etc., etc. All these things about Tilak are quite well known. Tilak Tilak is often celebrated as one of the first thinkers who talks about the idea of Swaraj. However, if we look at his idea of Swaraj, it is not what we generally expect. By Swaraj, we think of total independence. However, Tilak described Swaraj in four ways. Firstly, Tilak thinks that Swaraj means rule by rulers belonging to one's own caste or country or religion. So, own community is very, very important for Tilak. Secondly, Swaraj is also defined in terms of good governance for Tilak. Obviously, he is not using the term good governance. I'm just translating it into present political terminology. Tilak says that Swaraj can be Swaraj only if it is efficiently managed. If it is owned by, like ruled by own rulers, but it is misruled, then it cannot be a Swaraj. Thirdly, Tilak says that Swaraj, he defines Swaraj in terms of well-being. Uh, like a particular regime can be called Swaraj if it is promoting well-being of the people. Fourthly, he talks about freedom and rule according to people's will. So it seems that Tilak is talking about a kind of democracy. However, Tilak is not particularly talking about popular sovereignty. And so his Swaraj or his own home rule, or like he talks about right to home rule. So running a government according to people's wishes is important for him, even if ruler is foreigner or ruler is not your own. And so he was ready uh, for a kind of home rule with like with British Empire like as the sovereign, or India being part of the British Empire and giving Indians to right to home rule. One can say that when the Tilak was there, the idea of total independence had not emerged at all, and that can be one reason why Tilak is not talking about it. But I just wanted to make this clear that yes, Tilak talks about Swaraj, but Swaraj or home rule is not necessarily total independence. Maybe this is the compromise with his times, but like the demand for total Swaraj emerges only almost like let's say 10 years after his death. Another thinker who is again Hinduizing, let's say, political sphere uh, is Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. Savarkar's formulation of Punyabhu, Pitrubhu, etc., is very, very well known, so I'm not going to repeat that. I will be briefly talking about language cleansing drive by Savarkar, where he wrote extensively and also spoke. He delivered lots of speeches in which he talks about cleansing Marathi language of Persian and Urdu words. So Savarkar writes a very interesting text, which is titled, the English translation can be Manifestos of Candidates Contesting Election to Law Council. So in this article, he anthropomorphizes various words. So various words become human beings in this particular article by him. And then he assigns them specific genders, clothes, so attires, homes, and families, and then he elects some of them. So he obviously elects Sanskritized words and rejects Persianized or Persian based words, etc. etc. The terms that he uses to denote what he thinks is language contamination is also very interesting, because there were lots of other people who at the same time, not just in Marathi but everywhere, were talking about idea of language purification, contamination, purification, etc., etc., etc. But they all use the terms which have casteist connotations. Savarkar uses a particular term which has connotation of religious conversion. So language purification for Savarkar becomes a metaphor for community purification. Uh, Savarkar also uses so, like two interesting categories to talk about language: Sanskrit Nishtha language and Sanskritodbhav language. Now, the contemporary discourse is talking about language family. However, they are either called as Aryan language family and Dravidian language family, or Indo-European language family and Dravidian language family. The problem in using these categories for Savarkar is that if you use Indo-European or Aryan language family, you are including European languages and excluding Dravidian languages. So he wants to avoid that. And that's why he uses the term Sanskrit Nishtha language, which means languages who have either derived from or borrowed from Sanskrit. And so this categorization by Savarkar comes very close to his conception of Pitrubhu and Punyabhu, where he tries to exclude and include certain communities. So, by using the criteria of adherence to Sanskrit or Sanskrit Nishtata, it allows him to include Dravidian languages, but to exclude and exclude languages like Pushtu, which which in that linguistic discourse or discourse on philology fail in the same category, because Pushtu does not consider Sanskrit as the holy language. So, like holy land, like Punyabhu, here Sanskrit is becoming a kind of holy language, and adherence to Sanskrit is becoming a criteria for him. Till now, I talked about Bankim, Tilak, and Savarkar, who, uh, in a way, brought religion in their ideas of nation. But if we look at all these ideas, they are still not identical. They are bringing in religion, but in very, very different way. Now I will talk about two thinkers who gave critique of ideas of nations without really uh, becoming what we can now call as anti-national. I'm using this term because I mean, Tagore participated in Indian national struggle in a way. He was a participant in Swadeshi movement. However, at the same time, he was also extremely critical of it, and he knew limitations of nationalist kind of politics. So I will come to Tagore in a bit. Before that, I would like to talk about Phule, because again, like Phule's thought on his critique of Brahmanism, etc., is again quite well known. But Phule's ideas of nation are not very well known. Like Bankim, Phule was also very critical of socio-religious and political associations that had just started emerging in India. Phule passed away in 1890. So he just saw only towards the end of his life or beginning of Indian National Congress. However, there were other political associations which were precursor to Indian National Congress. Pule considers these nationalistic or socio-religious associations as necessarily Brahminical associations. He thinks that they did not include lower caste members or did not fight for rights of Dalits or other members of lower castes. So, politics of petitioning that all these associations were taking recourse to was not beneficial for the lower castes and Dalits, according to Phule. Phule thinks that how can we talk about nation if we are not united? So, Phule points out the hierarchy, closed caste because closed because there is endogamy, prohibitions on interdining, and when we are divided into these closed communities called as caste, how can we talk about nation? And so, uh, Pule is not necessarily anti-nation, but he's criticizing the idea of nation because he's saying that we cannot talk about nation unless we are all united. And unless we reject caste system, we cannot be united. And so unless all lower caste, Dalits, tribes and women are educated and given opportunity to develop their reason or rationality, we cannot be a nation. So we can say that while Phule is a very staunch critique of nation, what he is actually doing is he is saying that it is the rationality and equality that should be the basis or foundation of nation. Phule doesn't write a lot about nation. I hope I am audible because it's raining a lot here. Yeah, thank you. So I have only 10 minutes, right? Okay, so I will quickly try to wrap up. Uh, as I said, I will like lastly I will talk about Rabindranath Tagore, but again not about his well-known text, which is nationalism, where he talks about nationalism of the West, Japan, and India. I will talk about Tagore's novel called as Gore Baire, and many of you might have also seen a movie directed by Satyajit Ray with the same name. Gore Baire was also serialized as a novel in 1915, 1916, and immediately it was translated into English and published. Gore Baire apparently seems to be a story about a love triangle. So there are three major characters in this novel: Sandeep, Nikhil or Nikhilesh, and Vimla. So Vimla and Nikhilesh is a married couple, and Sandeep is Nikhil's friend, and a kind of passionate love, sometimes even erotic kind of love develops between Sandeep, who is Nikhilesh's friend, and Vimla. So apparently, it seems that it is about love triangle, but it is not. This novel is also a critique of dangers of chauvinistic nationalism, because Sandeep is nationalist and Nikhil is a social reformist. Tagore is trying to say in this novel that nation is a created entity. It's not inherited, it's not fixed, it doesn't exist from time immemorial. Uh, Vimala and Sandeep in this novel, these two characters, almost elevate nation to the level of God. And so participation in Swadeshi movement almost becomes a divine kind of duty. The novel is about this politics of desire, passionate politics, or even romantic politics. Romantic not only in the sense of love for or love between Bimla and Sandeep, but also love for country. And when we say romantic love or romanticism, it also means a lot of violence. So this novel, in a way, is also against this aggression implicit in the nationalism, because if it is romantic, it can also go in the direction of violence. It talks about materiality of the nation, erotic love for the nation, which can be very, very intoxicating. So Tagore again and again uses the analogy of intoxication. Intoxication. The Sandeep and Bimla are almost intoxicated with the love of motherland. Bimla talks about how she is radiant with new pride and joy for the nation. She talks about how there is a storm within her, and for the sake of nation, she is ready to snatch, filch anything, or become very angry for the sake of country. On the other hand, Nikhil, her husband, is against this hypnotic text of patriotism, how patriotism or nationalism can be hypnotic. Uh, for him, it is the humanity and morality which should be the foundations of nation rather than this hypnotic or intoxicating love. The novel is also critique of masculinity, which is implicit in the idea of nationalism. So this character of Sandeep once in the novel says that we are men, we are kings, and ever since we came upon this earth, we have been plundering her. So conquest over environment, conquest over men, and conquest over women, uh, which form his masculinity, form the core of Sandeep's nationalism. On the other hand, uh, Nikhil is quiet, contemplative, contemplative, and also respecting autonomy of his wife. So he doesn't mind if his when his wife falls in love with his own own friend. Uh, he does not try to pursue her. He believes very strongly in her autonomy, and he leaves her to take decision for her own. He doesn't like patronize her, or he doesn't want to take decision for her. He knows that she will come back to him, but he's also like ready to wait for that. He would have respected even if she wouldn't have come back to him. uh, so nation here we can see becomes very masculine in some through the character of Sandeep, while Nikhil's nation, or Nikhil's idea of nation, which also seems to be Tagore's own idea of nation, is opposite to this erotic, masculine kind of nationalism. On one hand, because Sandeep loves Bimala, he almost puts like he calls her Queen Bee, or uh, uh, like he almost raises her on pedestal. He makes her a kind of goddess and not necessarily mother. She becomes an object of erotic plus patriotic adoration. And Sandeep now claims that he is making this goddess or nation goddess, or let's say motherland, which for which Vimla is an image. So again, this seems to be empowering for women because now women are celebrated as goddesses, as Shakti, but ultimately it is a masculine game of power. Uh, Vimla here is seems to be uh, coming to public sphere and seems to be getting autonomy and empowerment, but she is actually becoming an instrument for empowerment of male leadership. Tagore says in this novel, obviously through Nikhil, that we imagine, no, not in this novel, sorry. In one other text, Tagore argues that we imagine that mother has become real, but it is not real. It is imagined, it is constructed. Because we believe that mother has become real, Tagore argues that we alienated this motherland from certain sections. Here is particularly talking about peasants. So there are several things that can be talked about this particular novel, but I think these are the main ideas in this novel that Tagore is talking about. So just to repeat and summarize what I have been saying, we can see that different ideas of nation and different critiques of nation are emerging in colonial period in India. In colonial period, thinkers' writings were also looked in a binary manner, that you can like colonial or anti-colonial. And however, Tagore is precisely criticizing this binary and saying that one can be anti-colonial and still not nationalistic, because nationalism can be masculine, it can be violent, it can be aggressive, and that's why it can be dangerous. Uh, so I think on this note, I would like to end this talk. Mm, and that's all. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Damle, for this very rich lecture. Uh, before I bring in certain talking points, I have a message for all the audience. If you have a question, you can either put a cross so that I can ask you to directly ask your question, or you can put your question in the chat box. So, Madhura, congratulations for this very uh, rich lecture, as I mentioned earlier. What you've done is brought this rich universe, this universe of ideation that is coming from different parts of the country. And the thematic of the idiom of the religion, the religious idiom, and how it becomes instrumental in shaping ideas of many thinkers, and how they are positioning nation vis-a-vis imaginations and invocations of certain kinds. Now, invocation could be that of a rich sense of history, or the gods and goddesses. You bring in a lot of debates, you bring in a lot of perspectives, from Bankim to Tagore from Bengal, and then we have Savarkar, Agarkar, and Phule from Maharashtra. So also it becomes interesting in the larger project of understanding how was the nation thinking, what were these strands of ideation that were emerging at a very significant moment. And the other thing is the strand of resistance, the stand of critique. What are the sources that are being drawn in terms of bringing a critique of colonialism from the rich sources, the rich texts that you bring and very brilliantly explain these narratives, these stories, whether it was with Anand Math or Gore Baire. I am interested in three things. And I would want to bring your attention, because I feel that within this universe of thinking, and this is something that is very close to the project that I am doing on women ideation and women thinking in the same period, is the missing gap. Would it be interesting for you to find certain women voices from these spaces, from Bengal and from Maharashtra, which were positioning themselves on similar concerns? There's this given saying that, women were not thinking about concerns of nation, they were not thinking about concerns of imperialism, which you actually find very evidently. Pandita Ramabai, for example, eventually starts bringing up the concern of imperialism, which then becomes significant in the later 20th century. The second thing that I'm interested in knowing from you is the impact, is the consequences of that particular imagination. So there are two frames of the women which are coming significantly in these thinkers, especially with Bankim and with Tilak, is what you closed your lecture with, this hyper-masculinization. And this masculinization is deploying certain norms certain imaginations for the women. So the Shakti trajectory of the goddess has been very critically engaged with a lot of women historians, feminist historians, works of Mrinalini Sinha, Tanika Sarkar, Uma Chakravarti, who are actually questioning this whole goddess sort of imagination and invocation. And the second is that of biological reproducer. Now, the frames that are being posed with regard to the women are actually very subversive, are actually very problematic, because where is the autonomous selfhood? Where is the last character that you ended your lecture with? Where is she? Where is the agency? And to this, I want to bring your attention to this brilliant work that Padma Anagol has done with Maharashtra. And she argues that she's very critical of this Bengal-centric narrativization of ideas of colonial India, because that led to a certain passive imagination of the women. Because around the same time in Maharashtra, from 1820s, in the works of Tarabai Shinde, Kashibai Kantekar, Parvati Athale, and then Pandita Ramabai Ranade themselves are posing a very different imagination of the agency and the selfhood, which doesn't gel well with the goddess as well as the biological mother sort of producer, and the burdens of nationalism. Because, there is an evolution in Bankim. Bankim is writing on a lot of concerns which are about equality. He's also, to an extent, sympathetic to the gender concern. But if you see the shift with Anand Math, it has a lot of fracture lines. And these fracture lines then become foundational in shaping a certain kind of discourse, the kind of discourse that Tilak would put in. And Tilak's role during the age of consent, the whole Rakhmabai case, and the kind of editorials that were coming out in Kesari. And also, like, his dual kind of reflection, being extremely critical of Pandita Ramabai, but being fine with the other. So also in a way then informing who was a woman who could be fitting in this nation. So in that, and because this is something which I've been trying to push, that when we do something like history of ideas, intellectual history of ideas in colonial India, it's just such a male driven story. And I'm so happy that the character that you brought and you conclude, and your conclusions are very, very helpful. But maybe it would be interesting to sort of do this story, do a her story, and maybe look at these ideas of nation or ideas of India from colonial India, finding these women in the vernaculars which you so brilliantly brought. So these are my concerns, and you can just respond to these right now, or or if you want, we can take a couple of more questions as it works for you. Thank you, Madhura.
Yeah, thank you very much, Priyanka. I think, yeah, since there are no more questions, I can, I think, start responding to your points. You are right. I was actually thinking of Savitri Bai and Pandita Ramabai, and like, but again, nation is not their primary concern. As you rightly pointed out, for Pandita Ramabai, colonialism or as you said, imperialism is a concern. But again, that is also tricky for her because she is also taking a recourse to Christianity, and so it becomes very difficult for her. uh, but still, she it's trying, like, she is being helped by the Christian missionaries in the Britain, and so she also, but she also tries to deviate from them and challenge them in a way. And that's why, like, she also, like, America becomes another point of celebration for her, because it is the West but not colonial West for her. So there are certain, definitely, strands of anti-colonialism or anti-imperialism in Ramabai, but again, nation is not her concern. I So if we look at all these marginalized sections, nation is not going to be their primary concern, whether it's Pule or Ambedkar or Ramabai or, let's say, Begum Ruqayya, who is another, like, major voice, since you are talking about Bengal, because it's not that, like, there were no women like Rashi Sundari Devi, like, all these women are also writing from Bengal, and lots of like scholars have also written on them. But for none of them, nation was the primary concern, and, like, maybe that is the reason I couldn't talk about any of them today. uh, but we can definitely talk about Bankim's female characters in Anand Bhatt. It's extremely interesting. There are two major female protagonists in Anand Bhatt. One is Shanti and another is Kalyani. So Kalyani is a very ideal Sati Savitri kind of wife who is ready to kill herself. So she takes, like, consumes poison so that she doesn't remain as an obstacle in path of her husband. So she's ready to kill herself for her husband. Sannyasi save her, but that is a different story. So on one hand, there is this female character which is totally ready to sacrifice, but in the same novel, Bankim also has this very strong character of Shanti, who is almost tomboyish. So the story is that she's raised by her father. She doesn't have mother, and her father has a ashram, school ashram kind of thing. So he educates all the boys in that ashram, and she is raised with all the boys. So the ways in which she behaves or things is totally like boyish kind of manner, and she cannot fit herself in the family household thing, so she runs away from family, she becomes sannyasi, she comes back. So she loves her husband, but she is again a very strong female character. So this is probably legacy from Bunkim's earlier concerns and earlier writings. But ultimately, she also thinks that she is also married, and her husband is part of this sannyasi, and she wants to participate in this group of sannyasis because she's the Ardhangini of her husband, and she thinks that she also needs to participate in what her husband is doing. So she's very strong, empowered. She has agency of her own, and she decides. So, and women are not allowed in this particular group. So she dresses like a man, but again, immediately recognized. But she almost compels them to take her in so she is the only female member of that community of sannyasis. So though so like these are two totally contrasting characters in Anand Mat, which also talks like I mean tells us a lot about Bankim's concern about gender. He like on one hand he thinks that women are obstacle in the path of and that's why these all are sannyasis. They are temporary sannyasis, so they just leave their families and wives and children and reside in jungle till their goal is achieved, and then they can go back. And only those people are killed in the battle who have some kind of love or who have developed obsession for women. So on one hand it's that, and on another hand there is this very strong female character who compels men to recognize her agency. So that's like quite contradictory actually.
Thank you, Madhura. We can agree to disagree, and we can have a conversation later about the category of the nation in these women's writing. Rajhans Oja has put a cross in the chat box. Rajhans, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. My question was regarding, actually, I have two questions. One is regarding your observation about Tilak, that he was, uh, I mean, his idea of Swaraj was particularly about his own caste or his own nationality and other things. So I was going through a biography written by N.C. Kelkar of Tilak, and through my reading, what my observation is that he was after his return from the jail of Burma, he was quite accommodative about the other I mean so-called others in our nation. For example, he was instrumental in shaping the Lucknow Pact, and at one instance he was even cited. I mean, I am particularly quoting him, where he was saying that we are ready. I mean, he for instance was ready to share or to give the rule to anyone from the deprived section of our countrymen to rule if it is coming at the cost of I mean excluding Britishers from India. And the second question was regarding Pandita Ramabai, because I am working on her and I have been through her work of Sridhar Niti and High Caste Hindu Woman and American Sojourn. She, in her writing, continuously invoked the concept of nation, because she was repeatedly saying that if a woman of a country or a nation is continuously deprived and treated in such a manner, how can a nation become so strengthened that they can attain independence? And while writing American Sojourns, which was initially written in Marathi for the local and vernacular audience, she was it is perhaps the first written literature which is comparing an American political system with Indian political system, in which she is providing the whole account of economy and the political system which exists in America. So is it really correct to say that there is no notion of a nation in the writings of Pandita Ramabai? This was two questions. Thank you.
uh, should I respond? Thank you.
Madhura, please do.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much, Rajhans, for these two questions. First, I would like to answer your second question. I don't mean at all that Ramabai doesn't talk about nation. I just wanted to say that that was not her primary concern. But you are right. Like she's definitely like interested a lot in democracy and society and the way in which American democracy works, etc., etc. But I was just trying to say that gender becomes her like major or primary concern, and nation obviously comes in her writing several ways. But that is not the major theme that she is interested in. Uh, that's all. Your first question about Tilak. Uh, what was the question? Yeah, other
The
inclusion.
shift in
Yeah,
Tilak's,
inclusion of other. Uh, Tilak's first criteria of home rule or Swaraj is that the ruler should be from your own community. Now, when he is saying caste or community, he is not saying the ruler should be from a particular caste. He is saying that for a particular community or for a particular caste as maybe he's using the caste in broader terms. Home rule would stand for rule by person from the same community. If the ruler is alien to this community or outsider to that community, then that cannot be called as home rule. Uh, However, we can also see in the same writings that he is ready to accept Commonwealth of British Empire and right to home rule within that as maybe a tactical compromise. So, as I said, he defines Swaraj or home rule in four ways. There are four conditions that he talks about. That is his ideal of Swaraj or home rule, but he's still not asking for popular sovereignty. He's still thinking that masses are not ready for total kind of democracy. So it is in this context that maybe I made that statement.
thank you, Madhura. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Yes, yes. One question from my side.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
Madhura, I would thank you later, but right now I'm asking you a question. In your exposition, you said that when capitalism, when print medium started favoring the capitalist interests, they got the Bible and the what some texts translated into vernacular languages of India. Of course, I understood it that way. And then you also mentioned that the lesser spoken languages, or which were not spoken by a large number of people, they were neglected because the readership was not much, and the capitalist or the trader wouldn't get much profit from getting them books translated into their languages. But then they also had some sense of community or a nascent nationalism, and it means that their concept, their thinking was totally ignored because it didn't suit the capitalist interests. What happened? What actually happened to those communities or to those languages? I just want to know.
Oh, thank you very much for this question.